Back in, June 2020? Blimey, sorry about that. We looked at 5 Sega games that had received ports to the NES. We looked at Alien Syndrome, Fantasy Zone, Afterburner 2, Shinobi and Altered Beast, and I think it's long overdue a follow-up. So in this video we're going to look at the remaining Sega titles available to play on the NES, and this time around things get weird. Strap in! Released in 1988 and developed by Sanritsu, this port of Fantasy Zone 2 is heavily based on the Master System game and features the same issues as well. The main one is that you don't have a map of the stage to tell you which bases need to be destroyed, making this a harder game to play tactically. But otherwise it's very much the same game, with the emphasis being on warp gates that take you to different parts of the stage that have their own enemies to defeat. The shop can be accessed at any time, which is a useful upgrade over the original, and on the whole this is a well-playing game that gives you more Fantasy Zone with some minor changes. Not essential, but definitely worth a play if you like a bit of Fantasy Zone. Oh, I'm not a fan of these guys. Developed by NMK and also released in 1988, Saiyuuki World doesn't appear to be a Sega game at first glance, what with its characters and scenario clearly riffing on Journey to the West. However, once you start playing it, it quickly becomes apparent that this is basically Wonder Boy and Monsterland, without the Wonder Boy license attached to it, and this was a pretty common practice for the franchise, as the license rights to the character of Wonder Boy and the game itself were held by 2 different companies. This is also how we ended up with the Adventure Island series, except Saiyuuki World didn't spawn a franchise of its own this time. Once again, this is a competent NES take on the Wonder Boy and Monsterland formula, with good controls and the same RPG-light action that requires you to defeat enemies for money, which can then be in turn traded for upgrades to your armour, weapons, shield and more. This is a wonderful little oddity that shouldn't be missed, and well worth playing if you only have a NES. The NES port of Space Harrier comes to us courtesy of Whiteboard and showed up in 1989. Once again, this is a surprisingly decent 8-bit take on its source material, and trust me, I've played a lot worse than this. The biggest issue with NES Space Harrier is one of scaling. It's very difficult to judge how close the enemy fire is to you, and if you couple this with a hell of a lot of sprite flicker, then it makes for a game that can become quite frustrating to play. Many a cheap death is coming your way. Thankfully, the controls are fluid and responsive, and the more you play it, the more you get used to the idiosyncrasies. Once again, I'm pleasantly surprised by how decent this is, and I would probably recommend it if the NES was your only console. But if it isn't, then there are definitely better ways to play Space Harrier out there. Finally, we have the infamous bootleg title Somari, a demake of Sonic the Hedgehog by Hummer Team, released in 1994, that swaps Sonic out for Super Mario. Now this has a lot of problems when it comes to control. Mario is heavy and unresponsive, and the game attempts some form of momentum, but it also feels very awkward when you're playing. Enemies are very fond of projectiles as well, and the game loves to throw as much enemy fire your way as possible, which just infuriates the player even more. Despite all this, it's still miraculous what's been achieved here. Every single stage from Sonic 1 bar Scrap Brain is represented here, even Final Zone. And while the stage layouts aren't accurate to the original game, a lot of what makes Sonic Sonic is here. Springs, shields, spikes, rings, badniks, and even working loops are all represented, and it's honestly such a bizarre sight to see in action on the NES. Sure, this is a frustrating game to play, but it's so unique it has to be experienced. However, if the Somari gameplay experience is just too rough for you to enjoy, then the homebrew scene is here to save the day. Developed by Wilf and released in 2020, Sonic Improvement Volume 2 takes Mario out of the game and tags Sonic back in, with a whole host of improvements. The main one is the game now controls a lot better. Sonic is super responsive and interacts with the environment in a more natural way. Stage designs have also been altered slightly to make them feel less unfair, and the graphics and music have been improved to look and sound more accurate to the source material. This is an outstanding piece of work that is quite difficult to comprehend even running on a NES. But here it is! Wizardry! Links to download this ROM hack can be found in the video description.